The thing that this book, to me, what it taught me was how to interpret narrative, how to understand it,
Mm,
and how to understand how to apply it to my own life, where I could see what are the things that I'm doing? What is my pattern of behavior? How does that map onto archetypal narrative?
mm,
And I could either, with that information, I could choose to think I know better than the collective understanding
mm,
of all of my human ancestors,
mm.
or I could listen to that and understand that maybe I'm doing something in a pattern.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com. Luke DeWolf, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Hi, Robert. Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Great to have you here. We're going to be talking about a very important book today. The first book by Jordan B. Peterson, titled Maps of Meaning. I know this is a book we've both read and we're both big fans of, and it is extremely long and dense, so this is going to be an extended conversation. And today we'll just kind of have a general intro. And speaking of intros, by way of quick introduction for you, you are the co-host of the Freedom Footprint Show with Knut Svanholm. And yeah, so I guess before we get into the book, we should talk a little bit about you. Like, who are you, Luke? What is your backstory, your pathway into Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning, and then how Maps of Meaning actually took you into Bitcoin?
Sure. Yeah. So, as you say, super important book to me personally, definitely right there in the path to Bitcoin. So yeah, I'll start with me. I'm from Canada, but part of my, anyone who knows me already in the Bitcoin community probably knows me as pseudo-Finn. I moved from Canada to Finland in the last couple of years here. And that's sort of an interesting choice. Big motivation for that being the Canadian climate of the last few years, not to really put too fine a point on that, but Canada started to, I started to have some issues with what was going on in Canada, and I got an opportunity to move and Finland ended up being a great choice. But to pull back just a little bit into when I was first getting into my career in Alberta, Canada, which is where Jordan Peterson is from. It's the oil capital of Canada, and really where all of the energy and most of the finances come from Canada. There are some who might dispute that the financial industry in Canada is from Toronto is more important, but really it's oil country in Alberta is the heart of the economy of Canada. That's just period. The Canadian economy does very well when oil is doing well, and it does very poorly when oil is doing poorly. It's a commodity attached country. And to make it worse, it's a regional thing. So the oil and gas situation in Canada is against all of the climate initiatives from a certain Justin Trudeau. And basically, it was a perfect storm around the 2016 time when oil was not doing well as a commodity, and there were a lot of barriers being put in place on the Canadian side. And basically what happened was Alberta had a really, really bad recession. So this was local, this was regional, and it was when I was just starting my career. I was really quite lost. I didn't know what to do. In hindsight, this is a huge, huge part of what primed me for Bitcoin generally, was just seeing how the economy and the government all work together and are influenced by each other, and the people who kind of make the economy work really get crushed by the policies of central government. So that kind of primed me in hindsight, but it wasn't something I was thinking about back then. Where I did go and what I was looking for was some form of meaning. Not to get too deep into my religious background, I was Christian on and off for a while, and for various reasons, I was mostly not into it right around this period of time, and I was searching for something different. And the main thing is I was at a big risk of just rejecting all kind of meaning and structure, which I think you might see as a theme for where maps of meaning might fit in. So I found, along with a good friend of mine who helped me along this journey, shout out to Dan Larrabee, we found Jordan Peterson together. He was a controversial figure around this time in Canada. He was coming out against compelled speech was essentially the thing. This was what he was against. There are people who would claim that politically he is anti-trans. The thing he would refuse to do, essentially, was to be forced to use people's pronouns that he did not agree with. And it was the compelled speech. It was coming from a bill in the Canadian Parliament to force the speech. And his entire body of work, his entire life's work, was about what's wrong with that. His entire motivation for getting into this field was wanting to understand the atrocities of the 20th century, the absolutely terrible things that were done by the Nazis, by the communists, by ideology, essentially. So this all leads to, he had a great series of lectures on YouTube about his book, Maps of Meaning. And something you mentioned was that this book is incredibly dense. Yes, it's nearly 500 pages, and it's written in some of the most difficult language to read, period. But the best thing I think he did was distill it into about 10, 12 hour-long lectures that he presented at the University of Toronto. And it was just in a little period of time where he was actually able to produce a version of Maps of Meaning with decent production value before he he left the University of Toronto because people were hostile to him. So there's a great version of these YouTube lectures, and this is what I found. And my friend Dana and I, we decided to go through these lectures as if we were taking his class and talk about them and see what we could learn from them. We aimed for an episode a week, a lecture a week. Fast forward to the end of that weekend, and I was through the whole thing. So something stuck. Exactly. Something stuck. And really the point from this phase of my life was I was absolutely primed to be looking for something to fill the void of meaning, which Maps of Meaning, as the book indicates, explains how we as people find meaning in the world. Yes. And to me, that is what the book does in a nutshell, and hopefully we can start to unpack that.
That's an excellent introduction. And thank you for weaving in like your personal story. I think it really sets the frame for the rest of our conversation. So you discovered the Maps of Meaning lectures, intending to go through them systematically over a course of weeks, but it sounds like you did them all in a weekend. How many hours of lectures is that?
Oh, I mean, it's got to be 10, 12 hours, something like that. Yeah, I absolutely binged it. There might be longer, but yeah.
Yeah, and so
I looked at everything else on his channel too. There was another lecture series that were from previous years and stuff. Over the course of a few weeks, really, I binged everything that I could find from him. So,
yeah. And what year was this?
I believe it was 2016. I could actually quickly confirm
2016.
That.
Okay, so you discovered him a bit earlier than I. I think I initially encountered his body of work in 2018. It was actually through Bitcoin. I knew people that were reading his book, 12 Rules for Life. I believe that's the book they were reading at the time, and a few people had mentioned him to me. And then one person individually that I knew in Los Angeles said, listen, 12 Rules for Life is great, but you have to go back to his earliest stuff. Go back to his initial lectures, go back to his first book. Like, that's where that's the real gold mine of his work is there. The stuff you're seeing now in 12 Rules for Life is kind of like the pop mainstream version of this deeper, more thorough work, let's say. And so I took that advice and grabbed Maps of Meaning. And I also went back to the beginning of his lecture series, not starting with the Maps of Meaning lectures, but with the biblical series. He did the Psychological Significance of the Bible lecture series. And wow, right? Just wow. I think I've listened to all of that lecture series plus Maps of Meaning lecture series, which is, I don't know, 40, 50 hours of content probably. And I'm not an audio guy typically, but I've listened to them all 3 times. I just can't get enough. I've read this book once, Maps of Meaning, very slowly, very thoughtfully, many highlights, many notes. I have it pulled up in front of me here. So this book, again, this is one of these words, right? Meaning. We throw this word around, like, what does it mean? What's the meaning of this? What's the meaning of life is a big question, like if not the biggest question that philosophers ponder. And I think this book does an excellent job of really dissecting what that means, right? What is the meaning of meaning itself? And he goes into this confluence of psychology and mythology and complex systems at times, and just sort of looking at it, looking at the way we generate meaning and all of the different meanings of that word. You're left with I left the book with a very shifted worldview or enriched worldview. And I think we could start really with the first line, the first sentence of the book. And maybe one other thing I should mention here. Peterson himself said he wrote this book over a 15-year period, I believe. He said he worked on it 3 hours a day, every day, for 15 years straight. And he said he rewrote each sentence an average of 50 times. So he was, I mean, one of the most, who knows how true, or like if he's just sort of averaging, I don't know. But when you read the text, I believe him. Like, it is extremely dense. It's extremely thoughtful. The context is very well thought through, the arrangement, etc. Not an easy read. Definitely feels like one of those books that you actually feel your neural architecture being restructured as you're reading it. It's almost like a painful experience. But I mean, I like books like that. Maybe there's a few of us in the world that do. And for those that might not want to read a book that painful, hopefully this conversation will help. So with all of that said, the first sentence in the book, chapter 1, titled Maps of Experience, subtitle Object and Meaning, Peterson writes, the world can be validly construed as forum for action or as place of things. Let me read that one more time since I messed up. The world can be validly construed as forum for action or as place of things. Now, and I get this from Peterson as well, a more poetic, perhaps, interpretation of this first line is that in the world, you could construe the world as something that is made of matter or as something that is made of what matters. And without knowing it, now Peterson doesn't go into praxeology and economics and this whole domain of human action that Mises talks about, but obviously the word action is in this first line. He's sort of opening this gateway out of the materialist worldview into the sphere of human action, right? Where we have purposes and cross purposes and scarcity, like all of these things that we get from the work of Mises and Rothbard and others. And in doing so, I think at least awakening someone that might be traditionally a materialist, myself included, who was sort of I came up in the school of, astrophysics, space and time, quantum mechanics, like fundamental particles. It's all reducible to some material physical structure. And he's basically opening this window to this other side that, no, there's this whole realm of relevance and purpose and interpretation and symbol. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the first line. I would humbly throw it over to you to hear what you have to say about that.
Absolutely. And what a first line. Exactly. And the best part about that first line is it really is a TLDR on the whole book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So masterfully done by Dr. Peterson there. And just to add a couple of things, there is so much to unpack with this division of the world as a place of things versus a place of action. It's the empirical versus the experienced. And in a lot of senses, it's the a priori versus the a posteriori.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The term a priori, I realized this when I was going back through to prepare for this conversation. The term a priori is in the index about 15 times, and it's a word that he used constantly in the lecture series. And the thing about that is a priori is the building things up from their principles is the core of praxeology and human action. And so it's just the funniest thing to me that they absolutely aren't related exactly, but all the same ideas are there. And so
yes,
that's the bridge absolutely between what Jordan Peterson is thinking and doing with this book and the thinking of the Austrian economists. But there's another side to it, and it really gets into the background of the motivation for writing this book that Dr. Peterson gets into a little bit here. He was having his own journey of being devoid of meaning, losing meaning, and the the story, he goes into it in the preface for this book, and I think also a lot more in the 12 Rules series. But he found Carl Jung, which is the bedrock of the archetypal psychology discipline, which I think Dr. Peterson takes to a new level with maps of meaning. But the foundations are all there. And the quote that I'll bring from Jung, unfortunately, I've never actually found in which book this actually comes from, but the quote is, "The most important question anyone can ask is, what myth am I living?"
Yeah.
And so the thing that this book, to me, what it taught me was how to interpret narrative, how to understand it, and how to understand how to apply it to my own life, where I could see what are the things that I'm doing, what is my pattern of behavior, how does that map onto archetypal narrative? And I could either, with that information, I could choose to think I know better than the collective understanding of all of my human ancestors, or I could listen to that and understand that maybe I'm doing something in a pattern. And knowing that maybe if there's something I don't like, maybe I can change that. So that was the massive, massive thing that this book taught me.
Yeah, no, that's really well said.
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, iCoin Technology. iCoin has just released a sleek new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone with a little touch screen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, no GPS. It's a strictly physically cold hardware wallet. Like I said, it's got a high-res 3-inch touchscreen. It's got a camera for air gapping the wallet. It's got optional Bluetooth compatibility. And it's really a brand new UI, UX experience for a hardware wallet, making it very accessible, easy to use, not intimidating. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like iCoin Wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. Go to iCointechnology.com today and use promo code Bitcoin23 for 30% off of this new sleek hardware wallet.
This is a very important term, like you said, comes up many times in the book. A priori, essentially meaning no priors, right? Without priors. Like, you would say symmetric versus asymmetric, right? Something is symmetric. If it's asymmetric, that means it's not symmetric. So this is a priori, no priors, without priors. Axiomatic, you might say, right? There's a fundamental, unshakable, irrefutable assumption on which we're building some belief system, body of knowledge, ideology, whatever it may be. And the second term, I hope I can pronounce this, A Posteriori. Is that pronounced correctly?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. I've only read that word. I've never said it. It's the first time. Those are basically the derivative, the theorems being deduced from those axioms, right? Something to that effect.
Yeah, a posterior analysis about inductive logic. That's kind of the definition here. Coming from observational evidence is how I put the difference between these two. So they're deductive logic coming from definition and first principles. That's a priori.
Yes.
A posteriori coming from observational evidence. So the observational versus the empirical, the experiential versus the empirical.
Well, there's so, and again, it gets a little subtle here, but so a priori, no priors, axiomatic. Common example I like to use, Euclidean geometry. Two parallel lines never touch, right? It's just an assumption. We don't actually go out into the world and try to observe all the parallel lines and measure them to the end of each end of the universe and make sure they never touch. It's a fundamental assumption on which you build Euclidean geometry, right? In the sphere of economics, praxeology, we have axiomatic assumptions like the axiom of action, right? Man must act. Man must purposefully use means to pursue valued ends. And to try and, the reason that's an axiom is because if you try to refute it by argumentation, you are employing the means of argumentation with the end of refuting the axiom of action, therefore confirming the axiom of action. You're using means to pursue ends, right? So it's very interesting. Whereas the a posteriori, this is going to be more like empirical reality, right? We go out and every time we take water to 0 degrees centigrade, it freezes. Every time, every place, everywhere we do it, as long as it, the salinity in the water is correct, it always freezes. So we do that enough times and eventually we say, okay, well, we've tested it and water freezes at 0 degrees. So there's these two different ways of knowing, right? There's like the rationalistic, deductive way, and then there's the empirical way. And to the point you said there with Carl Jung's quote, the most important question we can ask ourselves, what myth am I living? It's what's he saying here? It's something like, where do our beliefs or our ideology, how do they become action, right? It's guiding our action. It's driving our selection of means to pursue ends, is driving our selection of ends, right? What do we value? What are we aiming our action towards? And the myth or the story or the narrative, even the identity of yourself, right? Your name, your history, your background, who you think you are. This is somehow a narrative structure that you're using to fuel the selection of means and the selection of ends for conducting human action in the world. So these things are very difficult to talk about, obviously, because you're almost talking about language itself, meaning itself, thought itself, purpose, action. But it's a sad truth in modern reality that the word myth has come to popularly be conceived as a synonym for untruth, when it is quite literally the exact opposite, right? The story, the myth, the belief is like one of the most essential features of motivating you and guiding you as an acting, rational being. And I think Peterson, again, is starting to go into that side of the world, right? It's not just billiard ball, cause and effect universe, that we are reflective, rational beings that can intervene into a otherwise cold, mechanical universe and actually change it and shape it. So I'd love to throw it over to you, and then I want to talk about the meaning of meaning before we get too far, because obviously that word's very important in this book.
Absolutely. Well, and to touch on the part about myth generally, maybe this is a good point to talk a little bit more about the importance of the biblical series, the Genesis series that the Dr. Peterson did, and I completely understand why that was the hook for you, because when I found everything that Dr. Peterson had been doing. The biblical series was just being produced, if I'm recalling correctly, and so it was like in real time. The series was coming out. It was before the 12 Rules series and everything, and the thing that transfixed me about that was I had rejected Christianity entirely. I was running away from it fast and far. And the thing about it was this series, he explained what these stories mean. And I was mind blown there because the way he broke every little piece down, he spent so much time on specifically the Cain and Abel story as a prime example. There's a whole chapter in Maps of Meaning basically dedicated to that story structure, the hostile brothers. And this is one of the shortest passages in Genesis. It's 6 verses or something like that. And he breaks it down over the course of an hour and shows how this actually is relevant. It's not just some stuff from however many thousands of years ago that's completely irrelevant today. No. It's saying something real. And it's real in the sense that it's describing something real. It's not real in the sense of something physical. And this is again the distinction between things and actions. But it's real because it influences people's behavior and it talks about people's behavior. So that's the part that I really wanted to explore. And before I toss it back to you for the definition of meaning thing here, what I ended up doing for the next couple of years after this is I tried to emulate the biblical series again with my friend Dan. We tried to do our own pod exploring Norse mythology and Finnish mythology from the same lens. And of course, we didn't do nearly as good of a job as Dr. Peterson did with his biblical series, but we were trying to do the same thing in the way of kind of mimicking to understand if that makes sense. And the thing about that was just the best thing for being able to understand this stuff, by trying to break down completely unrelated or seemingly unrelated sets of mythology, myth, and then coming to so many of the same conclusions. It sort of took the veil away that these stories and these patterns are universal. Not universal in the sense that every culture is going to have a version of these stories in exactly the same way, but that there's something about the human experience that is transmitted through these things. And that was really what was important to me. And that was an entire chapter basically of my life. Again, all still pre-Bitcoin, where I was spending years exploring this stuff. Basically, that was the whole idea. So
yeah. It's strange. I think when you first encounter this work, I remember, what is one of the first things I heard Peterson say? Everything's a story. What do you say? Everything's a story, or we live inside of stories, something like that. And I was like, well, of course everything's a story. Like, it's almost like a tautology. You're just saying, oh, everything is an ordered sequence of events. Just, you're describing an ordered sequence of events. So like, yeah, no shit. Like, what is this guy? But then so at first you might reject it. It's almost too obvious or simple, but then you have to go layers deeper. And, okay, so for me personally, I, like you, rejected Christianity. I grew up Southern Baptist. I went to church often as a child. By the time I was a teenager, I was very curious about the stars, so I read some books on astrophysics, Stephen Hawking, Brian Greene, some others. Pretty deeply indoctrinated materialist atheist after reading a few of those books. I'm like, oh, religion's a fairy tale that makes everyone feel good. But the reality is, this hardcore applied mathematics, physics, science, right? Like, that's what's real. This is some stories we tell ourselves. But Peterson does an excellent job of, in particular in that biblical lecture series, but also in this book in explaining the significance of the biblical stories or the biblical corpus as a whole through different scientific frameworks, through different quote unquote objective lenses, right? Talk about the psychological. That's why he titled the lecture series actually, The Psychological Significance of the Bible, right? He's focusing on the psychological dimensions of the Bible. Not throwing out, he's not saying this, there's no theological value here, there's no moral value, etc., but just focusing on the psychological aspects because he is obviously a clinical psychologist. Now that word significance is very important when we start to talk about the meaning of meaning, right? The meaning of the word meaning itself. When we ask a question like, what is the meaning of life? What we are trying to say is like, what is the significance of life? What is the purpose, right? Why are we here? What does this all mean? So there's this one sense of the word meaning that we invoke when we ask these transcendental or profound questions, deep questions, right? Like what is the purpose of it? And purpose, obviously, as we alluded to earlier, ties in very closely to praxeology, right? It's like we're purposefully using means to pursue ends. So there's this reality of human action that's rooted in purpose. But we're also asking, when we ask the biggest questions, we're also trying to figure out the purpose or the significance of the thing. So that's one sense of the word meaning. There's another sense of the word where you might hear someone say, I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to bump into you. Excuse me, I didn't mean to bump into you. All right, we're talking about a divergence between intention and action, or intention and behavior. You attempted to do one thing. I tried to throw the dart and hit the middle of the dartboard, but I hit the guy's leg instead. And I said, hey, sorry, I didn't mean to hit you in the leg with a dart. So there's this other meaning of meaning where we're talking about intentionality, what we're aiming at, right? What we value, actually. And this, Peterson often refers to the word sin coming from that archery term, hymartia. Am I saying that correctly?
Something like that.
Could be mispronouncing it slightly, but basically the word sin is derived from this term that means to miss the mark. And so again, it's getting back to this aiming nature of human action, right? We're always pointed at some goal, and then we're choosing which means we're using to pursue that goal. And so meaning has something to do with that, the intentionality, the setting of the aim, and the actual execution of the actions to try and move toward that aim. So that's kind of the second sense of the word meaning. And then the third sense is just orderly information, right? Like if I just show you a scrambled set of letters, well, you would just say, this has no meaning. But then if I rearrange them into a specific sequence and it spells a word, right? It says praxeology, for instance. So like, that's a word, okay? Or we could say like the meaning of the word praxeology, right? What is the definition of it? Well, there's a specific ordered set of information that defines that word, right? The scientific study of human action, perhaps, is the definition. I'm not sure that's the exact one. But there's only one sort of specific sequence. There has to be in a very specific order. Obviously, order is a big theme in this book as well, that gives that term meaning. You could also think about this in like a phone number, right? If the phone number is in the right sequence, then it has meaning. It can allow you to reach the person that you intend to reach if it's in the right order. Or a tracking number for a package, right? If all the alphanumeric characters are in the right order, you can track the package. If I interpose or swap any two of them, transpose any two of them, then the tracking number has no meaning. It's not going to tell me anything, right? So there's these three, like, it's a strange word because it has to do with the biggest, most significant questions when we say, like, what is the meaning of life? But it also has to do with our intention as we act in the world, right? What are we valuing? What are we working towards? And when we miss the mark, like I didn't mean to do that. It was unintentional, we might say. And then the means by which we pursue these ends requires orderly information oftentimes, right? We need some map of the truth, right? Whether that's a telephone number or a good definition or a social consensus, right? There's another saying somewhere in this book or from Peterson's lectures where he says, all true maps must align. So the importance of you and I sharing the same definition of a word for us to communicate, we have to have consensus on the meaning of the term. Otherwise, we cannot communicate, right? If I'm speaking English and you're speaking Chinese, there's no consensus on meaning. We're just not going to communicate. So, those are that's how I like to lay out the meaning of meaning. And I'll throw it back over to you, but then I want to talk about myths again, how you said, talking about the reality of myths.
Well, yeah. So just the instant about the meaning thing here, and I love the intentionality, the sin example. That was another one of those things that really changed my view on how Christianity specifically is oriented, and maybe in a point of criticality, it's that if the concept of sin was actually explained in that way, as opposed to in certain evangelical Christianity circles, to sin means you're just going to go to hell, and that's how it's explained. And well, that's not persuasive for a young growing mind, but is literally true. And maybe we'll get to that a little bit later, how missing the mark sends you into hell.
Yes.
Metaphorically. But the other thought I have just about the meaning generally, especially your last definition of it, is it's the signal in the noise. It's taking away all the information that doesn't matter, because that's another important class of things. There's matter, and then there's what matters.
Yes, exactly.
So you strip away everything that doesn't matter, and then you have the meaning.
Yes.
And so that's a beautiful part of the example here. So that's my thoughts on that.
That's beautiful. And it's again, what matters though is relative to what your aim is, right?
Yes.
There's a certain set of, what is it? A latitudinal map. I forget the name of it. Is very useful for navigating most places in the world. But if you're at the North or South Pole, you need polar coordinates instead, right? So it's the actual means that you are invoking is useful relative to your actual end, right? So there's different context call for different tools, let's say. So it's not just to say that there's a universal set of things that matter and a universal set of things that don't matter, right? It's relative to you and your course of goal-directed action. How does Peterson describe this, right? That you have tools and obstacles, basically, right? There's a goal and a tool. Yeah. Tools, anything that accelerates you on the course to that goal, and an obstacle is anything that impedes you on the way to that goal, and you're sort of navigating it that way.
It's his terminology, I think, is the unbearable present and the desired future, something like that. It's something else in the future. It's the going between that. You have the reason you act, and this is really bringing back parallels to praxeology, right?
Yes.
The felt uneasiness is how I've seen it told in the praxeological circle. Yep, Mises. Yep. But then, so the Petersonian version is the unbearable present. So the present is unbearable. You must act. You as an individual have to act. But what are you acting towards? It's the ideal future. It's the ideal future.
Yes.
And that directs your action. So
Yes. No, that's a beautiful parallel because, yeah, the unbearable present, meaning that you must invoke some means purposefully toward some end. You can't just sit there as an inert lump. Just as Mises says, we act to reduce felt uneasiness, right? We're uneasy about the present in some way, and we're always acting towards a more idealized future, right? We have an idea of a future that's better than the present, and we're acting towards that end. That's excellently said. And the point on sin too, very useful when you consider that, okay, that's the nature of human action, right? We're always aiming at a goal, working towards it. We're missing the mark often, like
constantly.
almost constantly. If you really start to watch yourself, I do it all the time. Like you walk in the room and you're like, oh, I forgot my phone in the other room. Or you go to send the email and like, oh, I forgot to put the attachment. Like we're making mistakes like all the time, all day. And so if you learn, I guess if you frame it that way, that making a mistake is like sinning in the sense of missing the mark, then you start to understand the value of repentance. Repentance is just like learning from your mistakes, basically. It's like, oh, I see myself doing that again. Maybe I can, be humble enough to call myself on this mistake and learn from it and try to not repeat it into the future. All the while still knowing I am going to make mistakes forever into the future because I am human, fallible, etc. So it starts to like put this pragmatic or secular significance to these theological concepts, like about sin and, the wages of sin are death and things like that. Like we're all going to die because, well, your biological machinery wears out, right? It makes mistakes and it misses the mark and it wears out. So
now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a Bitcoin-enabled alternative to legacy health insurance. Now let's face it, legacy health insurance is an absolute scam. Nobody can explain this better than the legendary comedian Chris Rock.
Insurance. You got to have some insurance. You got to. That's an insurance. They shouldn't even call it insurance. They should just call it in case shit. Like, I give a company some money in case shit happens. Now, if shit don't happen, shouldn't I get my money back?
So with CrowdHealth, instead of just paying premiums that you'll never see again, you can hold part of this pool of savings in dollars and in Bitcoin through CrowdHealth. And when you have a health event, you can draw against this pool of communal savings. So go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove to learn more or sign up. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Wasabi Wallet. With Wasabi Wallet, you can receive, send, and store Bitcoin privately. In Wasabi Wallet, your transaction history and wallet balance are completely hidden. Wasabi Wallet is easy to use, all of its privacy features are built in by default, and it works with any amount of Bitcoin. Wasabi users can make CoinJoin transactions together with BTC Pay server users or Trezor Suite users. For BTC Pay server users, they can make payments directly inside of a CoinJoin, and for Trezor Suite users, you can make CoinJoins directly on a hardware wallet. These features result in fee savings and security improvements for both sets of users. So go to wasabiwallet.io today to download the state-of-the-art Bitcoin privacy wallet.
And on myths, it's unfortunate that the definition of myth is considered to be synonymous with untruth, because myths aren't real in the sense that they happened per se, right?
Yes.
But I love the analogy Peterson uses here. He says myths are real like numbers are real, right? Like they're almost hyper real in that you're not describing the myth of Cain and Abel, for instance, is not saying there was definitely a guy named Cain and a guy named Abel and they were brothers and they were hostile and this whole saga unfolded. It's talking about the nature of relations between human beings, like across the broadest possible scope, the most generalizable expanse of human interaction, right? Even within us, right? We have like kind of the hostile brother good and evil intentionality within us at times, right? That perhaps the sacrifices we're making are being honored or they're not being honored. We may feel resentment about that. We may feel violent about that. We may feel whatever, hostile towards someone because they're, succeeding in an area that we're not, perhaps. And also between us, in the same way that numbers aren't real, right? There's not like a 3 you can touch and be like, oh, there's 3. This is when 3 happened. But it's the most generalizable language, right? That any grouping of objects that are, I don't know the word for this, exhibit 3-ness, right? There are 3 distinct elements. Yep. You can say there's 3 stars, there's 3 mountains, there's 3 waves, there's 3 children. Like it can apply to any category essentially. And so myths are more like that, right? They're abstracting out all of these lessons that we've learned about ourselves across human history and compressing it into this very tight little data packet, or it's a story, a data packet, a narrative. And it contains so much information and it's so universally applicable that, again, not real in the sense of Cain and Abel, this actually happened, but meta real or hyper real in the way that numbers are hyper real. And they can be applied to such a broad range of human interaction, both internally and externally.
Exactly. And the thing about the way that myths are formed as well, because Dr. Peterson talks about this too, is likely there were some real stories in there, some real events that did happen, but what gets remembered over time, over generations, over hundreds, thousands of years, what gets remembered? The core pieces of information that are necessary for people to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost simple when you think of it like that, mm-hmm. right? That before there was the ability to save all of this information, all of this data in, well, I think you're talking about that you have a PDF of this 500-page book. Well, that's just in your computer, right? There's no such thing as scarcity of data anymore, at least as long as civilization continues to exist. But prior to that, humans needed to store information in a way that could be passed down and understood. Mm-hmm. So myth is the vehicle for that. So I think maybe this is actually a good point where we can break down the core features of maps of meaning, the core elements of myth, because I think we probably won't really have much time for much else, if I'm honest.
Yes, please.
And so I think the breakdown here, the real core feature here in maps of meaning is order and chaos. Mm-hmm. Order is the known, the landscape of that which you know, and this can mean exactly the literal things that are in your brain that you know, and it's also the things that make sense. It's the thing you're aiming for. That's part of the known, because you can't aim for something if you don't know it, or if you don't have a conception of it. So that's in the known. Then all of the things that you plan to do to get to that aim is also an element of the known. And I'm going to quickly reference as well that, so the first chapter in the Maps of Meaning is called Object and Meaning, and it's describing this stuff. It's the order and chaos. I'll get to chaos shortly. But chapter 2 is about 3 levels of analysis, and this is where the book starts to get dense. And the first one is what I want to touch on, is that sort of the normal life, what we do day to day, is the level of analysis that most people live in and think in, and where this entire conception makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so the known is what you do day to day, is the things you plan to do and that you try to execute. And every time we run into obstacles, we encounter chaos, the unknown, that which is not known. So the entire book is about this interplay between order and chaos. And to bring that into real life, I mean, you gave some examples, right? The forgot to bring your phone from the other room. Well, that's an obstacle to your plan that you have to overcome. Now, the human brain, and there's a whole other section about the neuropsychological function, the nature of the mind, the neurochemistry of why this is actually true. But the human brain is adapted to deal with these obstacles, to so-called interplay between order and chaos, right on the boundary. Little bits of chaos are easy. We can handle that. The problem becomes when the chaos is massive, when you don't know what to do. When you wake up one day, and this happened to me not long ago, a lightning strike took out the metro station 200 meters away from my house. And I didn't know this. I couldn't go to the store across town to pick up the thing that I wanted that day. And I decided to go to a different store that didn't require me to go on the metro. But the thing was that the whole city was locked down for not locked down, but that's a bad term. That metro station didn't work, and so people couldn't get to and from parts of the city. So that's a bigger part of chaos, and hundreds, thousands of people had to deal with that particular bit of chaos in their day from a freak lightning strike. There was no rain, there was no thunder. That day it was just a freak lightning strike, and so seriously, it's like the entire thing here is about how we deal with the interplay between order and chaos, and how myth and archetype explain in increasing levels of detail and depth how these two things interplay and have an effect on daily life.
Yeah, excellently said. And there's another major theme which Peterson, I think, largely is inspired by the Taoist and the split between order and chaos, right? This is yang and yin, I think, if I'm saying that respectively. I always loved the dichotomy of explored versus unexplored territory, right? The explored territory is like, it's the known. It has already been mapped, if you will. Mapped territory, you might say. And then everything outside of that sphere is unmapped territory, unexplored territory. And this can be, as you said, any number of domains, right? This could be intellectual domains. You might have a known area inside of, you might know, Algebra 101, but you don't know 201, 301, 401. This could be physical space. This could be social space, right? Maybe you have certain relationships, friendships within a certain circle. Beyond that circle, you do not. So it's almost this universal descriptor for how we as individuals relate to the broader world. And I think it also ties in nicely to, intention, which we said earlier was one of the senses of the word meaning, and means and ends, right? That we kind of know our intention, at least. So like, your aim. Well, here's what I'm trying to do. Now, maybe there's some subtleties there. You might not always know exactly what you're trying to do, but hopefully in a very dry sense, like if I'm a running back for a football team, I'm trying to get the football in the end zone, right? That's my intention. The means I'm going to run are, a certain play, right? We're going to run a play. The quarterback's going to hand me the ball in a certain way, and these guys are going to block in a certain way and hopefully open up a hole for me to achieve my intention of getting the football into the end zone. And then the ends is actually getting there, right? Scoring the points, but that's the intention, the means is sort of in between, is like the actual act itself, it's action. And then the ends is unknown, right? The outcome, you don't know if you're going to achieve the ends. And every time you encounter the chaos, right? The guy doesn't throw the block correctly and you get tackled too early. Well, then you have to adapt, right? Maybe you need to do a spin move, or you need to do something to deal with the chaos, right? That the order of your plan. I love the Mike Tyson quote, right? Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Like, once you encounter that chaos, you have to adapt to it and map it, right? You want to incorporate it into the known and then reposition yourself to deal with the next unknown configuration that you're going to encounter. So it's very universal, I think, in its scope. And it's also, as you said too, later in the book, Peterson does go into the neurobiology and whatnot. And there are arguments that, the left hemisphere of the brain is adapted to deal with order, right? It's much more reductionist, rationalistic. It looks at things, it atomizes things, dealing with things as individual components rather than looking at the whole picture. Whereas the right hemisphere is, typically much more associated with creativity and artistic pursuits and, spirituality and whatnot. That is kind of it's taking this holistic view on the world. And so these two hemispheres of the brain sort of operate in tandem to deal with this order and chaos nature of the world. And what is myth doing? Myth is sort of like describing that interplay, right? That whether it's the psychological interplay or it's the physical interplay or this, the broader macro historical interplay of all of these actors interacting across time. Like, what have been the consequences of that action? What can we abstract from that? Obviously, one of the most popular mythologies is the hero's journey. I think there are arguments to be made in this book and others that Christ is almost like the meta hero. It's like we've abstracted from all the hero stories the essence of what makes them all heroic, and that is Christ. So it's not just fairy tales and make-believe for entertainment purposes, or it's not primitive people, trying to explain away in some supernatural way things that they don't understand. It's describing the human operating system. It's like looking at the software that we run, right? This latent cultural programming or something that we all inherit. We can barely articulate because it's so latent, right? It's like we take it for granted, right? We're the fish swimming in water. And I think this book is one of the best at opening people's eyes to the reality of all of these things. And I hope this has been a pretty good intro. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on? This book also gets into alchemy later, which I think is super interesting. It's like one of my favorite things in the book towards the end, which we really didn't talk about yet. But anything else we should kind of highlight in this introduction?
Yeah, well, I think just to emphasize the part about the neurochemistry here, it's the part about the book that I'll be honest, I understand it the least, or at least I believe Jordan Peterson at his word and his evidence here. I would not understand the sources he's referencing personally, but it's the most important part of the book for anyone who doubts that this stuff isn't grounded in reality here, I think. Because all of these other parts, the mythological bits and even the relating to everyday experience, I think people can relate to this stuff and even dig into it and understand it. But when there is an actual basis in the neuropsychological side to it, then it really grounds the book. And it's one of the three levels of analysis, essentially from the second chapter, titled 3 Levels of Analysis. But the normal life, the neuropsychological function, and the mythological representation are the three. And for me, it's the mythological side to it that I deep dived into, and where a good companion to this book, by the way, just like a side here, is the History of Religious Ideas by Mircea Eliade.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, huge. Well, it's one of the most cited sources in this book. So it's sort of the companion, a natural companion here. But yeah, I think basically on the high level, it's as an introduction, it's this understanding of the concepts of order and chaos, and that it's this interplay. And I guess just to tie off the hell aspect referenced earlier, it's that when the chaos is unbearable, when it's not adaptable, you go into the mythological hell. And how to get out of that is the tale of redemption and the way that humanity can be resilient, and as individuals we can be resilient. And so there's a lot of hope here. There's a lot of darkness, but a lot of hope. The darkness, you have to face it, and this is something else that Dr. Peterson says too, is facing the darkness. I'm not going to get exactly right what he said, but it's so important to understand it, that every human being is capable of evil.
Yes.
But then you stare that in the face and understand that about yourself, and maybe that's something you can actually avoid. And so the hopefulness here, the hopefulness in this book is that what I hope out of talking about this book is that people who listen to this hear that this book has something unique about the world, because I believe this is a truly unique book. What it's encapsulating is something unique, and it's hopeful, because by understanding this stuff we can become better. And the alignment to praxeological thinking, I hope, really resonates with some people, but it is also different. This is probably one of the biggest areas where I differ from Knut as an example, or any of the other big kind of Austrian thinkers here. Is I didn't come into this space from that angle. I came from this angle of the maps of meaning, from the mythological side. And really, I will also say that the thing that got me into Bitcoin in the first place was that you talked about on Lex Friedman about Jordan Peterson and maps of meaning while talking about Bitcoin. And then, well, I knew I had to look into that a bit further. Sailor series, rest is history. So that's that. But yeah.
I love to hear that. No, and that's a great point too, that you get in from this book a deeper understanding of the nature of heaven and hell, right? It's not just being some metaphysical place your soul goes after you die, but as extensions of that order and chaos theme, right? And it also gets into the nature of good and evil, right? That because we are capable of self-reflection and we're self-conscious, it gives us these tremendous capacities, right? To learn and propagate knowledge across generations, etc. But it also gives us this capacity for evil, where I know something that will hurt me, right? Whether this is something physical, whether this is something emotional, psychological, I can now use that knowledge, the self-reflection of understanding what will hurt myself, and I can use that to intentionally hurt others. And that is one framing of evil, right? Is when you are self-consciously using that knowledge to actually hurt someone, right? Vindictively hurt someone. There's another framing for the term evil, which he cites here, I think comes from Milton's Paradise Lost, that evil is the force which believes its knowledge is complete. So a big theme in this book is humility, right? That there is always more unexplored territory. Always. In every single domain, you're never going to have the totalized map, the totalized knowledge. That is totalitarianism, actually, which leads us into the horrors of the 20th century, right? People that thought they had the final answer, the final solution, the whole thing figured out. All the territory has been explored. Here's how we're going to do it. Right? The utopian vision inevitably leads to the most brutal atrocities that humanity has ever seen. And all of that is in this book, right? All of that, all of this theological, historical, psychological, mythological information about ourselves and our relationship to the world is in this book, which is why I am very excited to be doing this series. I wanted to do this for a long time, actually, so I'm glad you spurred me to do it.
Oh, that's so awesome. And yeah, I think this has been a perfect introduction here, and I'm thrilled to get to do this with you. So looking forward to continuing this over. I don't even know how long we're going to need for it. As I said, it's dense, but yeah, I'm here
considering
for it.
We got through one sentence in chapter 1 in hour 1, this is probably going to be like a 5,000 hour series.
Hey, perfect. And it's a perfect parallel too as well. It was the same thing in the first episode of the biblical series. He made it through something like verse 1 of Genesis.
That's right.
Something like that. Yeah. Or was it chapter 1 or something like that?
Yeah, that's right.
He was planning to do the whole Bible in something like 12 lectures or something. And yeah, quite make it. So it's some foreshadowing there. But
so
yeah.
we have our work cut out for us. Luke, very excited to do this. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yes, thank you. So on Twitter, I'm still somewhat confusingly BTC Pseudofin is my Twitter handle, or X. That's the main place to find me. And I make the Freedom Footprint show with Knut Svanholm. This is my attempt at contributing to the Bitcoin community, facilitating philosophical discussions. We had you on just recently, and it's trying to do something a little bit different and have conversations like this from a slightly different side. So that's where you can find me, Freedom Footprint Show and BTC Pseudofin.
Awesome.
That's me.
Well, thanks again, and I look forward to episode 2.
Likewise. Thanks, Robert.